guys, to That Bible Guy and to your daily devotional series on Isaiah. Today we are at Isaiah 38, dealing with Hezekiah's illness. Big question for us today, the biggest of all questions possibly. Why does God allow us to suffer? Why would God allow us to suffer? The biggest question probably there is. It's asked in scripture many times, and it's been asked the world over throughout history, and it's certainly been asked at the minute during this coronavirus pandemic. We'll get to that in a moment, I'll get to that in a moment. Try and hold myself back. But just as well I'm doing this now, there was a bit of a nature battle going on in the garden this morning between the birds and the cat. So you may still hear chirping going on. I think there's a bit of a standoff between our cat and some birds in the garden. I don't quite know what's going on. So that's a forewarning if you hear, yes, that battle going on, hear the birds and so on. But just before I share about today's devotional, I was listening to something this morning, and it was actually related to work, and it was all about how to be a better coach, which is my role, and how to listen better and so on. A couple of things from that just really convicted me. To be honest, it's just nice to be convicted. This actually does fit in with what I'm going to share in a moment. Actually, I wasn't just as aware of that as I was, but one of the things about listening, I was convicted by these things myself. When you're listening, don't multitask. I was just convicted by that. Like, don't be half in and half out of a conversation. I do this a lot. I've definitely got an agenda. I'm definitely very busy, but there are too many times when I'm multitasking in my mind while somebody's talking to me. I'm ready to say something else, or I'm waiting something else. I'm not fully in. I'm half in, half out. And that also goes as the thing of go with the flow in conversations. When you're thinking about something when somebody's talking to you, I'm keeping that there to get it in at some point. I think it's relevant. It's because I care. It's not necessarily a horrible thing that you're doing. You feel it's useful in conversation, but just going with the flow. I think that was it. And don't equate my experience with the other person. Just thought these were useful. I just felt convicted by them, which is why I share them today. Don't equate my experience with other people's. I'll always jump in because I like to be relatable. I like to be empathetic with someone. You know, I'll share my experience because they've just shared theirs. But I just got to watch that everyone's experience is unique. What they've went through, I haven't went through. There may be some similarities, but I'm only sharing this because I felt convicted by it this morning. I need to be a better listener. I need to hear what other people are saying better and not just have my own thoughts, my own questions, or my own ideas. I feel like God's sharing that to me this morning. It's through work, but also spiritually as well. But we come to Isaiah 38, Hezekiah's illness. We heard about him yesterday in his battle against Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. Well, that's been sorted for now, but he became ill and was at the point of death. It tells us Isaiah 38. And again, a reminder, why would God allow us to suffer? Why does God allow suffering? The big question. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, went to him and said, "This is what the Lord says, put your house in order because you're going to die. You will not recover." These are Isaiah's words from God. You won't recover, get your house in order. Well, that's it then, isn't it? That's it, finished. My time is up. And we'll get Hezekiah's letter in a minute to explain how he felt. But he didn't leave it at that. He then turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord. Turned his face to the wall. Get rid of distractions. "Remember, O Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion, and have done what is good in your eyes." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. I think God's just said, your time is up. Get your house in order. Hezekiah bitterly cries, turns to the wall, and beseeches God about his situation. "Remember what I've done." The word of the Lord came to Isaiah. "Go and tell Hezekiah, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David, says. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will add 15 years to your life." What a moment! I will add 15 years to your life after thinking that was going to be it. Some people talk about this as being that God changed his mind. He may have done. Given the nature of God, I suggest it's unlikely that he changed his mind. But he certainly gives us free will to see how we're going to adapt and change to the circumstances we're faced with. Jesus did test his disciples when he asked, "What will we do for these people who need food?" Knowing full well what he was going to do, but he tested them so that he could see what was in their heart, and also so they could see what was in their heart. So I don't necessarily I think it's unlikely that God may have been testing Hezekiah, because he had told him this is what's going to happen. When he came and prayed, and then God says, no, you can have 15 more years. Keep praying for things. God may be testing our hearts. Keep praying. That's just a little, it's not a minor point, it's a huge point, but I want to draw attention to something else. And God says it gives him a sign for this as well. But then the really great part here is Hezekiah, verse 9, a writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, after his illness and recovery. So Hezekiah lays his heart bare for us to see how he felt and reacted to this, my life may end. It said, I said, in the prime of my life, must I go through the gates of death and be robbed of the rest of my years? I said, I will not again see the Lord in the land of the living. No longer will I look on mankind or be with those who now dwell in this world. Like a shepherd tent, my house has been pulled down and taken from me. And it says, I will wait patiently till dawn, but like a lion, all my bones day and night, you made an end of me. Excuse me. He says, verse 15, it says, but what can I say? He has spoken to me, and he himself has done this. I will walk humbly all my years because of the anguish of my soul. Lord, by such things men live, and my spirit finds life in them too. You restored me to health and let me live. So we go on to Hezekiah's predicament. He realizes he's in the prime of life, yet his life's going to come to an end. He can't worship God from the grave, if you like. He will no longer see mankind. So he presented how he felt, which is obviously in despair. We know he wept bitterly. Now, I asked the question at the start, why would God allow suffering? I'm not going to comprehensively answer that, and I may put up a link where I've answered this before in a much more intellectual way, you could say, dealing with the barriers that we have in our mind. My daughter asked me yesterday, my 5-year-old daughter asked me yesterday, why would God allow the coronavirus? Like, she maybe listens to something, well, she doesn't listen to my videos, but she may hear me talking on occasions. She's trying to equate this great question to my daughter, and I give her some basic answers with some illustrations from life. Sounds heavy going. It was very, very 5-year-old level, to be honest. But she did ask me that question, so she's trying to comprehend already. There's a wonderful, loving, incredible God there. Why does he allow this thing to happen? There's a whole range of ways to answer that, and as I say, I'll put up the link for a lot more details on that. I'm only going to deal with that from the point of view of Hezekiah here. So the question for Hezekiah here is, why would God say he's going to die, cause him to die early, cause him the grief of all that, and then change his mind? The grief of the king of Assyria coming, the grief of being the leader of that country, that city, Jerusalem, the country at the time, the grief of being told he's going to die when he wasn't then going to die. He got longer after praying. Just a lot of grief. Greater grief than I've felt in my life. It's a sentence of death, you could say, like Paul talked about. But he does say something quite profound here, which I think is very relevant. And this is his prayer after it's all over. How does he reflect on everything? He says, my eyes grow weak as I look to the heavens. I am troubled, O Lord, come to my aid. Verse 14. He then says something very powerful. But what can I say? He has spoken to me, and he himself has done this. God has done this. So God sometimes allows suffering. He sometimes causes suffering by the direct actions that he takes. But he says here, verse 15, I will walk humbly all my years because of this anguish of my soul. Because of the trouble, because of the anguish of his soul, the result was, I will walk humbly all my years. And he said, Lord, by such things men live, and my spirit finds life in them too. The anguish of his soul was the reason why he would walk humbly all his years. Why is that? Suffering and grief, and this is only one of many things, and it doesn't answer everything, but suffering and grief causes us to rethink our mortality. It makes us rethink how capable we are. It reminds us how needy we are. It reminds us of how vulnerable we are. It reminds us, if we needed the reminding, that we're not all that. We're not all sufficient and all powerful. We are very vulnerable people. I sit before you today in good health. Life is generally good for me. I could get told tomorrow, as many, many thousands of people can do, that you've got a debilitating illness that could result in your end. That could happen for any of us at any given moment in this life. And he was saying here, because of the anguish of my soul, for whatever reason, whether it be because of suffering, because of an illness, because of relationship breakdown, because of a pandemic that we're in right now, loss of a job, loss of whatever, physical ability, a limb, the list goes on. But because of the suffering of his soul, he will walk humbly all his years. It gave him the right perspective. The right perspective was more important than the perfect life he had dreamt up for himself. The right perspective would cause him to walk humbly and therefore in truth, with the proper recognition of his position before God in the universe the rest of his years. If he hadn't have had that suffering, like many others in scripture, his heart would have became proud, like Uzziah we read about before. His heart would have became proud, and he wouldn't have walked humbly with his God for the rest of his years. We see many, many stories of people, pride leads to their downfall. And regardless if they had suffered a bit more pain to begin with, a bit more pruning, then they wouldn't have been in that predicament. And something else profound he then says as well. Verse 17, Hezekiah's conclusion of the anguish of his soul. Surely it was for my benefit that I suffered such anguish. In your love you kept me from the pit of destruction. You have put all my sins behind your back. Surely it was for my benefit that I suffered anguish. In your love you kept me from the pit of destruction. God can see what we can't see. He can see ahead down the track when we can't see it. Hezekiah's destruction could have been just at the end of his pride. And God knew he needs to be humbled here. The only way to do that is suffering, is something that causes him to rethink, to recalibrate, to remind himself how vulnerable he really is. This is what this pandemic has done for so many people. It's put them in a fantastic position to recognize, who am I? What am I capable of? What's this world really all about? What am I striving for? What's important? We've all said, when this life goes back to normal, when and if it does, we're going to see things differently. The suffering that it's caused, which was unthinkable 2 months ago, has caused me to become a different person, to prioritize all the right things. If this problem hadn't have happened, we would never have thought, I need to value time better. I need to value people better. I need to value the wonderful things I have and be even more grateful, to value the earth better. I would never have done that had it not been for this suffering. Now there's many, many, many more arguments than that I can add in. And as I say, I'll put the link up on here. But God would allow suffering because it produces something wonderful. And it gives us the perspective that we needed, that if we didn't get, destruction could be just at the end of the road. That can be just lying ahead, just waiting on us. Suffering is essential in our life. And again, I benefited greatly from that. The greatest thing that ever happened to me, some of the greatest things that ever happened to me, was experiencing bullying and suffering when I was young. I now believe in myself to be a very strong person, in my being, able to overcome obstacles that come into my path. Sometimes it takes me a day or two to stew on things, but I have this belief, because I overcame bullying when I was younger. I have this strong belief I can overcome anything, with God's help for sure, but I can overcome anything with God's help, because I've overcame something that was incredibly painful before. So for me, it was all good. Why would God allow us to suffer? Because he can see the big picture. He knows what we need. And because it results in us walking humbly with the right and proper perspective, able to see the truth. And God has already promised, I will take care of all your needs. I will take care of all your needs. So as I say, this is just a little look at why would God allow suffering in perspective of Hezekiah 38. Hezekiah 38? Isaiah 38. I'm giving him his own book. Isaiah 38. we look at Hezekiah. As I'll put up the link, please let me know your thoughts on this. This is a huge topic. Why would God allow suffering? And it's easy for me to sit here today and intellectually tell you why he allows suffering, and yet at the moment be relatively free of suffering. I know, again, 6 months ago I wasn't. My stepdad had died in terrible circumstances, shockingly, and it still hurts. And I was suffering at that time. And I wouldn't have been able to do this video at that particular time. Soon after I did, I reflected on it a few weeks later, and I thought, what did I learn from this? And it gave me a good perspective. I never wish anything like that. It was terrible and very, very painful. But right now, I know I'm not in that situation, so I don't want to be trite with people suffering. And I know it's hard to experience when you're going through it. It's hard to grasp it. But it's just that reminder. Look at Hezekiah. He was faced with death, where he went to God for help, and God gave him the right perspective on his troubles and his suffering. And that's what I pray for us. I pray that we have the right perspective on your suffering. If you don't, please drop me a private message or just a message on the site, That Bible Guy on YouTube, that BibleGuy.org website. Please drop me any comments you have. Please like and subscribe to the channel. But I thank you so much for tuning in today, and with you all again soon. God bless.